Thank you for coming. You know, it's the middle of winter. It's supposed to be spring almost. But we have been, my wife Mary and I have been spending a lot of time traveling around Montana and the world. We just got back from Antarctica, and we had a chance to get very close and personal with some penguins and seals. And in fact, Antarctica was warmer than Montana while we were there, and sunnier. But anyway, I wanted to show some of the artwork, mostly paintings, a few sculptures that I've made over the last few years, some a little older, trying to keep them around the central theme of environmental awareness. And I had probably 200 things to show, and I had to kind of weed through them because I have some favorite things, but I thought, I wasn't sure if they fit into this little group of works. So what I want to do is kind of start with, and you'll have to bear with this odd transition. It was a beautiful dissolve in Keynote, but not in PowerPoint. Kind of imagining this space we live in. I'm from Montana, and so many of these works relate to Montana. But the state of this place was very remarkable before the Europeans visited, and parts of it are still incredibly remarkable, and others have changed considerably. So we're looking at the prairies, and here's a painting of Glacier Park. But things changed when Lewis and Clark came up the Missouri. I think this is about 1802, and saw the shining mountains in the distance there. Most of the indigenous peoples and Indian peoples, I think they were hunting. They did not encounter any, but they saw a great many animals. And as they got closer to my hometown of Great Falls, and as times changed, the place I grew up in looked more like this, even though it was very close to the same river. And as Lewis and Clark passed through Great Falls, they encountered more animals than they had seen on any other part of their trip or would see. Herds of bison, grizzly bears, wolves, the pronghorn antelope, elk, deer. Everything was there. It was quite amazing. I grew up in this place called Great Falls that is also known as the Electric City. And by the time I was a kid in the 50s, if you saw a deer, it was a remarkable experience. That's changed due to restoration, awareness, and conservation efforts. It's just another one of my paintings that kind of reflects the river system and the subtext of so many things that go on in what we humans and with our civilization and technology do when we encounter nature. Sometimes it's wonderful, and many times it's just not pretty. We're getting better at it. I went to high school in Great Falls, and the mascot was the bison. Really important animal, especially to the Native American people. Here's Charlie Russell up there, and I think that's Chief Plinniku. There's the Smelter Stack. There's a poster from Buffalo Bill's Wild West, but estimated population in 1830 was 40 million, and by 1889 they estimated there were about 542 left. And my rock and roll band I played with was out of sight, so we're on the we're playing for the senior prom, so that's there too. And some friends of mine that had written books that had to do with understanding what had happened and where to go from there. Title of this, Mary, my wife, titled this for me as Renewal. So you can, sorry, go back. You can see the bison, a bison family actually in the clouds, and a landscape that's still one of the most incredible landscapes in America, I think, is the Front Range of the Rockies. If you take Highway 200 from Lincoln to Great Falls and maybe on up, you can go on up to Helena, or you can go on up to Fort Benton. It's really, truly a remarkable landscape. This is more of a surreal piece, but trying to kind of relate to that highway. There's Highway 200. And since I live in Missoula but grew up in Great Falls and have friends and family and do a certain amount of the printing for all the many posters and prints I've made, I always do that in Great Falls. And as I drive that road across that space with the Front Range on the left and the amazing prairies, Square Butte up there, my mind always wanders, you know, and so this is one of those moments of the wandering mind. A few years back, a group that was trying to advocate for predators, they were called the Predator Conservation Alliance. They have since changed their name because the word predator was just not received very well by a lot of people. Predators were sort of to be shot or gotten rid of or trapped. But that's Pishkin outside of Great Falls, which was a buffalo jump site for many thousands of years. And you see Square Butte in the distance, and this is reimagining how it had been and how it could be again. So we've got the whole cast of characters for the Northern Prairie community. For instance, the Prairie Dog Community was really important. You probably all know this, but for thousands of years, the prairie dogs burrowed and brought soil up and really were able to help create this amazing grassland that the bison were able to graze on as they moved around. And the community included everything from snakes and salamanders to the burrowing owl to the swift fox. There's the pronghorn antelope, different raptors. Pretty amazing. You know, they have a society out in eastern Montana. I think it's called the Red, what do they call it? They've got a shirt and a hat, crosshairs on one of these little guys. They like to see them turn into a pink mist. So I think that's, you know, bad behavior. You need to rethink stuff like that. The coal train that comes through Missoula 16 times a day, maybe it's 18, comes out from eastern Montana and on its way to the ports in Washington. So this is just kind of looking at the landscape over toward Lewistown and kind of seeing this in a way that reflects the changes that humans have brought to this space. Sky is pretty much the same. The horizon looks good. Coal train moving across. We sometimes wonder if that much coal gets moved to China, if it'll upset the balance of the planet, because that weighs a lot. Pronghorn antelope, and of course a furrowed field that indicates agriculture. And this, it's not an indictment against this, it's just acknowledging it and asking the questions of, is this right? Should we keep doing this as we move into the future? Should we change things? Again, the Front Range, and with the oil derricks. My former wife's father homesteaded here, and it was hard scrabble homestead, and eventually sold the land and just had to leave. And shortly after that, they discovered oil there. And but this is one of a series of paintings that I made called Altered State. And they're all mostly painted on copper with either oil or acrylics, and just trying to take a look at the landscape in Montana, maybe unromanticized. It has a certain amount of beauty there. There's this wonderful teepee in Browning. You know, sometimes it's open and most of the time it's not, but it's so neat. And when I first painted this and I put it on the internet, I bet I had 100 tribal members from Browning contact me and tell their stories about this place and all the things that had happened there, who built it, they went through many different incarnations: gas station, cafe, espresso. So back in the late 80s, I worked with a group called Defenders of Wildlife, and they had this wild idea to restore wolves to Yellowstone National Park. And it hadn't happened yet, but they asked me if I could make a painting that would sort of show what it might look like, and to maybe get people excited about it and contribute to the fund they had, which they called supply-side environmentalism, which would be if one of these kills your cow, we'll do everything we can to keep them from doing it, but we'll pay for the cow with this fund we've set aside. Anyway, this did happen, which is, you know, one of those really big stories of restoration and conservation in Yellowstone Park. And I know you're all students of this, but once the wolves were there, it changed the park's ecosystem back to closer to the way it was prior to the eradication of wolves, which had killed off enough elk to keep the elk from eating all the plants in the riparian zones of the creeks. And so things changed, birds came back, you know, fish came back, the whole system became healthier. And this is just, you know, one of a series of paintings I did that's sort of really about the triumph of nature over technology. A little bit of humor thrown in and some symbolism up there. I call this Outside Chance. And it's a lithograph, a hand-printed lithograph, which is a different way of making an image than painting. It's doing a series of drawings on stones or metal plates and printing each one in succession to eventually arrive at a finished image, but you have an edition. And in the case of this, it was a pretty small edition. I believe it was 100, and probably in about 7 colors. So. And this was part of a series. I call this Refrigerators. And having just come back from Antarctic, we saw a number of these species of penguins. But I painted this back in the 80s. Penguins are looking for a cool place because, you know, their climate has changed. If you look out the window, you can see a palm tree out there. We got the gentoo. He has the weenie in his mouth. We saw quite a few of those in the Falkland Islands. And different species, the big king, which is an absolutely beautiful animal. I made a whole series of paintings I call the Invader Series. And, you know, trying to think about things like science and ecology and animals and people and how they all interact, but also retain a sense of humor about it. And because it's like my mother said, you can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. And, or maybe get a few more people to take a second look at something. That makes sense. Call this one Leave It to Beavers. They've had to move in into the house there, into the log home, because they ran into a problem with finding enough trees to cut down up there. In this particular case, this is all hypothetical, but kind of fun. It with various woodpeckers in there too. There's a pileated and a little. Okay, somebody tell me what woodpecker that is. You know? I think it's. Yeah. Anyway. Now, today we're hearing more and more about climate change and seeing it with our own eyes and experiencing it all over the planet. I did this one a few years ago. This is a painting of Missoula, and imagining if Lake Missoula returned, and what the fishing opportunities might be, and the habitat. And one interesting thing is sometimes these posters would get out. I wouldn't know where they would wind up, but the company, I think it was in Pittsburgh, that makes these hydrants, where I signed my name, I got a great letter from the president of the company, and he said, "No one's ever put one of our fire hydrants in a painting before. We have one hanging in our main office. Thank you so much." I had no idea. And these are all the different trout species that live in our waters on the west slope. That have big bull trout down there, which has been threatened due to habitat loss, and big cutthroat and rainbow and the golden and a brown and a kingfisher. And if you look closer, some people in the building. That's the Wilma Theater. Anyway, the Clark Fork and Pend Oreille Coalition asked me to do a piece once that just spoke to watershed and what watershed meant, or how would you portray watershed. I mean, it's one thing to make a painting of a river with some mountains, and it's another to try to see how these things are all interconnected and all the part of the same system. The storms bring rain to the mountains. We have some glaciation, but the snowpack eventually comes down and becomes creeks and rivers, and supports an array of plants and animals. So this is more kind of a medieval way of looking at it than it's painted realistically, but I had gone to France and seen some church windows in some of the old cathedrals that tried to portray the world they knew at that time in a more symbolic way, even though the images were realistic. So, and again, that's some of those same fish we were talking about, and the insects that they're going after there, the beaver, etc. This is one called Restoring America's Forests, and I actually worked with the Lolo District and a group of different people that were really interested in restoration of the forests that actually did work for the Forest Service. And because, they of course do more than just, it used to be that you would go, okay, Forest Service exists just to give permits to timber companies to cut wood. And turned out more people were graduating from schools like this and University of Montana Forestry, and coming away with ideas about restoration ecology and helping make changes to the way we take care of our forests. So here's a forest, and it's really just outside my home in Missoula, Patty Canyon. And a good friend of mine actually worked on this, and it's so interesting to see a forest that is kind of open like that, more park-like. And we've got Smokey there, and the bear, some nuthatches, insects, nice big owl up there, and deer, and more little chickadee, and this is for the viewer. You can take that trail and go into the forest. But so I had an interesting time making this. In fact, each one of these things has been a great learning experience. The different people I've worked with who advocate for the natural world, and I really would only take commissions that had to do with nature or education or the arts. I wasn't really, even though people would say, well, you do commercial art, it's like commercial artists will take anything that comes in the door, including ads for politicians and all of that. And I really have never done that, but I've made it just well over 200 posters in this vein. And it's interesting, just one poster up in the right place can be seen over time by thousands of people. And if you could get hundreds or even 1,000 of them up in places, and so even though it's just ink on paper, they can wind up, and they're inexpensive, so you don't need a lot of money to have one. And a number of groups and organizations that sell these use that money to, like the license plates, to derive a little more income, to maybe hire in the case of Trout Unlimited, they made enough money on their plate to hire 2 river biologists. And same with Vital Ground. It has one of my bears on it. They actually were able to use that money to purchase important habitat for not only grizzly bears, but other animals too, in important areas. One reason they're called Vital Ground is because you could have something like Glacier Park here and the Bob Marshall here, and a thin wedge in between that was, you get shot on sight if you're a grizzly bear, or it's just difficult. So they make a deal with the farmer, a rancher, the state, or the feds, and purchase that supply side environmentalism again, purchase that chunk of land and open it up. So there was that corridor that had been there, the animals had been using, of course, for tens of thousands or years, was open again. This was a poster I made to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Wilderness Act in America. And most of these animals live in Montana, so we're really pretty darn lucky. We don't have the polar bear or the tortoise there, but we've got just about everybody else. And this is, I call it this is the Wild Kingdom? No, the
Peaceable Kingdom.
The Peaceable Wild Kingdom, yes. This is one, I've done a series of pieces for Trout Unlimited, and this is one of just the big Blackfoot River near Cottonwood Creek, between Missoula and Helena. And there's a big Blackfoot chapter of Trout Unlimited has worked a lot with a group called the Blackfoot Challenge. And that is a group of ranchers, conservationists, environmentalists, scientists, politicians, and just fishermen came together to work on, rather than opposing each other, how can we all come together on this place we love and work on it together. And it's been very successful and important. Call this one Big Medicine. And when I was a kid, I did get to see Big Medicine before he wound up in the History Museum in Helena. He's there now, but he's stuffed. And Big Medicine and everything that maybe relates to stories that people tell about themselves through animals. The social, the economic, the environmental aspect of trying to bring those things, the historical aspect into the picture plane. So there's a archaeological aspect to this, and then kind of a red, white, and blue, but with green, and a big, beautiful, Big Medicine, really important symbol. There's the one I was talking about that's on the Vital Ground license plate. which is just a donation that I made. You know, yeah, you can use that on the plate, and it worked out really well for him. But similar to this series of pictures I did that really are about animals and the land. So here the bear really can't exist without an environment to exist in. Otherwise you're just in a zoo. And in this case I decided to make the bear huge, and some of the things that relate to how men and animals have mostly how people have exploited the bears, but again, there's a, let's see, there's a little six-pack holder there, and trap, and a few other things. There's a wrestling bear, we got dancing bear, Smokey, and the all-important landscape. So this is actually going into the Bob Marshall and Scapegoat Wilderness. And I made a piece for the Helena Forest Foundation and the Wilderness, Montana Wilderness Society. And actually was able to go in and see a bit of a truly wild place. It's quite remarkable. This would be the Scapegoat. And was in there for 4 or 5 days, went in by horseback, and it was raining and really foggy. And I remember hiked up hoping to get a glimpse of the mountain, of Scapegoat Mountain. And the fog parted. And I was looking at this tree, and there was kind of something on the top of the tree. Well, these wings unfolded, and this eagle flew around us. And as we walked out, I saw the fresh bear tracks with all kinds of animal tracks on the trail, no human tracks. And it was kind of amazing to kind of think what a, amazingly wild and beautiful place that is. Very powerful place. But those kinds of experiences, I sat right there and sketched that little tree set on a fallen log. So that comes from experience too. Idealized. This is the view from Mount Jumbo looking east toward Butte. So we got the Clark Fork River coming down. I painted this one before we took the dam out, so you can still see the dam. They're starting to build the golf course here, and there's the lumber mill, which they now throw concerts in and have a big brewery there, and a Bitcoin facility that makes a lot of noise. And anyway, we have a herd of elk on Mount Jumbo, and just kind of meditating on this corridor that, another one that Lewis and Clark came through, and how it looks now. Those ribbons of road are kind of beautiful in their own way. So fire is another important part of the landscape, and has become even more important as we've kind of watched the climate change. And so this is something I did for the smoke jumpers in Missoula, and it's really just I placed this in Rock Creek, which is about 20 miles out of Missoula. It's a great fishing river. Some of you have probably fished it or been there. It's another piece from Altered States. How much time do I have left? I might have to go a little faster.
It's a total of, you have up till 50, so another 12 minutes.
Okay. Move along. But looking at water, thinking about water, using water. So this is really water's amazing. I mean, it comes as a gas, as a liquid, and as a solid. And it's just it's so important to everything. But I just found the contrast so interesting. Again, this part of my Altered States series. So the Holter Dam on the Missouri. Used to fish there when I was a kid growing up in Great Falls. You'd go, and if you fished below the dam, it was pretty good fishing. So this is the Clark Fork River where Milltown Dam was removed 10 years ago. And the heavy metals and all the waste materials from the mines here and Anaconda came down Silverbow Creek, eventually into the Clark Fork, and they lodged behind this dam for 100 years until there was this huge amount. I know everybody knows about that here, but they hadn't taken it out yet, and they were talking about what they'd like to make a piece of some kind. We made a print out of this. And so I went out and tried to imagine what it would look like if the dam wasn't there, and then if the dam was there. So I decided to do a ghost dam. So this is the dam disappearing kind of just before your eyes. And it's gone now, and now that's the confluence of the Blackfoot and Clark Fork rivers, and it's a big park. It's the newest state park, and it's a big one. And there's places to put in and take out, and fishing access and boat ramps. And there's a, friendly beaver looking at the dam, kind of envisioning what he might build if he had an opportunity. I call this one Winds of Change. So it's another way of generating power. Iceberg Lake up in Glacier Park. Glacier Park, when it first became a national park, I think, I may be wrong, but I think it had at least 130 glaciers, and I think we're down to less than 30 now. So this is one where there's still some glaciation happening. I call this one Polar Shift, and this kind of imagining other animals besides just the animals that we live with in Montana, and kind of what they're up against as things change. And Flathead Lake. I like this just because, Montana's still a beautiful place, and I didn't want to be all doom and gloom. So, we still get out there, and there's still lovely, lovely places. And but you do have to watch out. That was a long-eared owl, by the way. I call this one a tree of life, and it's a whitebark pine, which is a tree that grows at a higher level. Because they're a little higher up, they tend to be buffeted by the wind and rain and dramatic weather conditions, so they gain, I think, a lot of character, become very interesting. They also put out a seed that's highly nutritious. And the Clark's Nutcracker, there's a bunch of them there, but wait a minute, yeah, Clark's Nutcracker lives on those seeds. But they like to bury them and have a little stash. So they'll take a seed and they'll fly maybe across over here, bury the seed, and then being birds forget about it. So that's how their seeds are spread. And it takes these birds to do that, kind of a symbiotic thing. The blue grouse overwinters in these trees, lives there. Bears love the nuts that they usually find in squirrel middens, because the squirrels raid these nuts too. And so the whitebark pine winds up being its own really interesting and beautiful ecosystem. And I was working with a group from the West. We have them in about 6 states, and they wanted me to do a whitebark pine painting. And so I did this, but they didn't like it because it was too much art, not enough science. But I liked it. So it never became a whitebark pine print or poster. But I made it into a print. So. This is, I call this one Ascension. It's just kind of, you know, a lot of woodpeckers here. And there's mostly pileated woodpeckers, but there is, there is a woodpecker that called the Ivory-Billed Woodpecker, which is thought to be extinct now. Occasionally people think they see one, but in Louisiana. And there may be a small population of them somewhere in Cuba. But, okay. And that's just, when I would go for a walk, I would just pick up trash that people left. And some of it was just plastic bags and stuff, but a lot of it was beer cans and bits of wire and this and that. And I kind of saved it in a box and then decided to make the background for a picture out of it. So I call this Reunion. A couple of big trout getting together. Now, I'm going to show a few more slides here, and I'll try to move quickly, but I call this one Dinner Goose. So this is like Thanksgiving dinner, and if you, if you look here, you'll see the smokestack. And I grew up in Great Falls, where my father worked for the Anaconda Company and made copper. And copper wire. It's one of those taking down the fences. So this is me in Great Falls, right where Black Eagle Dam is, which is the dam I showed you in the beginning of the slideshow. There's the smelter smokestack, and that was how people could find Great Falls. You could always see that smokestack from miles away. But 30 years ago, they, after the Anaconda Company left Great Falls, it was blown up. So this is a deconstruction painting. Call this one Oil and Water, painted on copper as well. Most all of these works are on copper. And that's the oil refinery in Great Falls in the evening. Berkeley Pit, a couple of birds, swans. There's, this one's called Sacred and Profane. You can decide which is which there. This is Silverbow Creek, part of the restoration that happening there. This is Milltown Dam, as they had pulled out the dam, and they had to, just before it was out, they had to rechannel the river, and tremendous amount of work was done there, and whether people like it or not, the tailings that they dug up were all brought back up to Opportunity near Anaconda. And but I don't live too far from here, so I was amazed at all the when they drained it down to do this work, all the trees, tree stumps that were down there. They were amazing. This is help me, Mary. What's the title of this?
I always forget.
It's got an interesting title. I can't think of it right now. Paint on copper. These are interesting pieces of coal. And I know I'm getting long-winded, but I live near the railroad tracks where 16 coal trains go by every day. And I called around. I wanted to buy some coal, so I'd have coal to look at to make it look correct for this painting, this picture. And nobody had it for sale. You couldn't buy it. So people said, well, you could walk along the railroad tracks and try to find some, you know. And then a friend intervened and was able to, an attorney friend was working out in the Judith River country, a Powder River. And a great old farmer she knew heated with coal that just came from his land, you know. And so I was able to get coal, and some of them had nice fossils in them, plant fossils. So with the coal that was left over, I made this one, which I call a marriage of convenience. And that's a man and a woman made out of coal. And then I had these, a lot of toy cars that I wanted to do something with. So I loved dinosaurs when I was a kid. So I constructed this, I call it T-Rex with a W. And then its companion is this one. It's called Fossil Fueled. And it's all dinosaurs. I'm almost done. And this is just remembering that it's important to get out there and contemplate nature and respect it, and in whatever way we can to restore it whenever it's damaged, which I know most of you are, I think, in Robert's class for. Same figure, but the figure not so big. You know, here's nature's bigger than the figure, and making a minimal impact. And I love these subalpine fur, and there's a lot of birds and animals hiding in there too. And that's it. So. Thank you.